Hello, fellow educators. Welcome to our very first podcast. Now, let's talk about us. As current teacher, we co-founded Win Elements with a mission to empower teachers like us with the right tool and the right strategy to empower our students so that we can provide learning equity. And today, education is a lot different than the traditional teaching that we notice when we go through our graduate program. Right? We have new technology, we have new pedagogy, and we have new research. But the biggest question is how do we implement them correctly or to some extent have the right impact on our student? And that's where Streamline Ed professional development is developed with the mindset that using the expertise of current teachers and the experiment that we implement in our class and test out the strategy in our class, the technology in our class, we hope to share with our fellow teachers so that way they have some similar impact or they can expand on our strategy and expand on using the tool that we provided so that way we can grow together as a teacher. And in this very first topic of our podcast, one of the most important topic that I think comparing to student accountability is teacher accountability. The topic of teacher accountability has never been more important than today as parent wonders, or at least our society starts to question what is the accountability of educators for students. Well, society, or at least in American society, has developed standardized tests annually to assess student learning, which somewhat directly relate to measure teacher accountability by looking at how well the student do. And that's always been the argument all the time. And the accountability question has always been like, for example, where school have high graduation rate and also all the other positive thing, but on the standardized test, the score does not match, as well as the level of proficiency for enter a college with the level of ELA or math skill that allow them to bypass the prerequisite course. And that's the biggest question. Why are students graduating but their skill set doesn't show on the state test? And that's the biggest challenge for today. So we are going to tackle our first podcast by looking at what is really teacher accountability from the perspective of teacher, and we can hopefully look at the perspective of parents, administrator, as well as our student. And one of the biggest reasons why we co-founded Win Element was to create this transparency in teaching, and using the right tool and the strategy, we create this complete transparency for all stakeholders in the field of education. And that's key for our student learning. So that's enough in terms of about us. Now let's go back to teacher accountability. What is it? Like any profession, there's always some kind of accountability. And that's just a natural process. Every job that you work at, there is an accountability level. Okay. But the problem that we have now is that the society start to look at student test score and make a judgment in terms of teacher accountability and measure student and measure teacher effectiveness based on the student test score. Now, first of all, as current teacher, we can tell you right away, teaching student is not like a cookie cutter job where you go in and you do the same thing over again. Every single one of our students are very unique, and I can tell you that. And even with the AP courses or honor classes, each student has a very unique characteristic, and they require a unique attention for us to provide the best learning experience for that particular student. It's not like we go in, we deliver our direct instruction, read the PowerPoint, word for word, explain it using scripted from the publisher. No. And that's the biggest gap between traditional teachers and today teachers, that No longer teachers are the main source of knowledge. Rather, is the many years of experience with working students, with student and teacher and parents, so that we use those expertise and challenges that we overcame in the past so that we can apply to the new student we have today. But like most teachers, you already noticed teaching is not a task that we can just define by direct instruction. It's more than that. And one of the key factors is, for example, grading. If you are a teacher right now, you understand the frustration of grading and how much time consuming it costs in terms of your daily life and the life after school. And it's also a big chunk of your instruction. Because we know that if we don't grade student work, what do you expect the student going to do in the future in your class? Of course, they're not going to do your work anymore the moment they figured out that you don't grade your work. And grading is a huge component for any teachers in terms of having classroom management, in terms of engaging their student. And another factor of grading is providing timely feedback. And you imagine a high school teacher or middle school teacher, right? There are usually 160 students, okay? And you take that. Imagine it take about 2 minutes time 160 students, time that, okay? Okay, take that math. Take 2 minutes time 160 students. What do you get? You get a huge number. And then you time that by 5. What do you get? Even a bigger number. And there's no way you can do that as a teacher to grade every student feedback in terms of giving feedback. It's almost impossible. And going back again, that's the mission of why we founded Win Element, to provide the tool to streamline most of the teacher tasks. So that way we can have the actual time to provide real teaching where we can build the rapport with our student and build a relationship with our student to show them that they are a capable learner and they can learn anything if they put in mind to. And one thing we have to realize when we talk about teacher accountability is that elementary, middle school, and high school, they are not college students. We have to realize students take time to learn, and they learn by making mistakes. And when we talk about teacher accountability, we have to talk about student accountability that go with it. So it's very important because if you look at students in terms of their achievement in the class or how well they do on a test, is directly related to the teacher accountability. When you have teachers who are dedicated, okay, their student will be more on task, their student will be more engaged. And that means, what does it take to be a dedicated teacher? It takes time after school, time on the weekend to grade student work and provide timely feedback. Okay, and that's the key component. You have to grade student work and provide timely feedback. Or else, once the student figured out, they are going to cheat, especially with today technology. Student can take a picture of a worksheet, mass email on social media, done. That's it. That's all they have to do. And what are they going to do during your class if they're not being held accountable? So to judge a teacher by looking at the student achievement on a CAS score or some kind of high state test, it is a very incomplete picture when you look at in perspective of teacher accountability. Okay, so now let's talk about why do we need to establish teacher accountability and be transparent about it as today teacher. Well, first of all is for you to empower yourself by presenting to the stakeholder like parents, student, and administrator that you are taking your job seriously. You are doing every task that you can think of in terms of providing the best education you can provide as today's teacher. And I'm telling you right now as current teacher, if all you have is just a grade book, All right, and that's all you have. Good luck. That is not enough for you to demonstrate that you are accountable for your class, or just have a grade book with a bunch of zero or a bunch of letter or number, or even a comments on a grade book. That is not enough. So when we design a when we design our course on Streamline PD, we had to realize that teacher accountability is one of the biggest driving factors. We need to establish transparency in teacher accountability before anything else, okay? And once you have that, teacher will feel empowered that they have the evidence to show that they have done their best, use all the possible technology or strategy they have at hand to provide the best learning possible. And then from there, we can look at student effort and learning outcome to determine if teacher accountability really exists. So as you can see, right, that's a pattern. You cannot just go straight to student accountability and start there and stop there. It starts with teacher accountability and your job as a teacher to implement strategy or use whatever tool you have at hand to show that you have done your job as a teacher and provide the appropriate intervention to do that. So let me show you some of the key example right here. And let me just show you something that we do on our class. So here's an example chemistry class. Of course, it's not a real one, but this is just an illustration. Basically, we have this online grade book, right? And with your school, you probably use different communication system. So the grade book on your district is very limited because all you do is you create an item and you upload the grade by manually enter the grade, okay? And that's all the student going to see. And that is not enough in terms of showing the stakeholder, especially parents, when we have parent meeting, it's not enough to show them that this is great learning quality, right? So what you can do is what we do is, for example, in this case, if I look at a sample grade, okay, it has this interactive grade book. Let's click on this particular student. Of course, it's a fake student, okay? And of course, you can look at the whole entire grade in terms of the outline of report and other detail as well. And you notice they are grade for every single one of them. But here's the most important thing. If you have to think yourself as a student as well as a parent. We all know that every single parent loves their student and trusts their student or their kid more than anything else. And our job as a teacher, again, going back to transparency, is you need to provide a tool or some kind of documentation that show what is the student is doing in your class and what are you providing in terms of intervention. If I click on this particular lab safety quiz right here, okay, and of course in this case, this particular student can 29.2 out of 30. And again, this is a fake student. So on your end as a teacher, you have access to all this. As you can see, look at this, the timestamp of every attempt they input in. And that's what I'm talking about. You look at this right here, you can see that how many questions are attempt and what questions the student flag, right? And or incorrect as well. So when you look at incorrect question like this one, you can look right away what is the student struggle with, right? And when the student do this particular type of problem, they have this instant feedback. And that's why we're talking about teacher accountability. You have to look at the lens of student accountability at the same time. You cannot just go in and expect, oh, I'm going to go in, observe this particular teacher, and if he or she do this, check, check, check. It doesn't work like that anymore. With the special case of our today's special needs student, okay, teaching is no longer, again, not the cookie cutter job where you have to go in and check, check, check. And I think that's a big mistake for a lot of teacher evaluation, is that they rely on observation rather than conversation. Let the teacher demonstrate. Let the teacher discuss with you and demonstrate what they have done for their student. I think that is more of a valuable approach than going in, observe a teacher doing a lesson, and make the judgment from there. Of course, administrator taking other factor, but I think that is a failed evaluation system where is demoralizing the relationship between administrator and teacher. So hopefully in the future when we have somebody else, policymaker, coming along the line, shifting from that traditional teacher evaluation to more of a conversational evaluation, where teacher administrators take the time and talk it out and let the teacher demonstrate, portray, convey what they did in their class to support their student, and look at student work and evaluate it from there. Okay, because when you walk in that 1 hour teacher observation, it's not really a valid observation, because it's more of a show, because the teacher had to put on a show for you to demonstrate that they are accountable for their job, right? But the reality, you have a very incomplete picture. So hopefully, for those who are listening to this podcast, go back to your district and tell your district, say, if you want the best teacher you can get, if you want the most positive school culture where teachers are working with administrator, you need to shift how you evaluate teacher and make it a conversational, okay? And I understand there is a subjective component. There is lack of the randomness. But when you are measuring a teacher, what are you looking for? You're looking for to catch them making the wrong mistakes or doing something wrong? Or you want to support your teacher? And the only way I can guarantee you, if you want your teacher to trust you, is having that positive relationship where you and your teacher are talking about teaching pedagogy that impact your student at your school. And the only way you can do that is through the lens of the teacher, demonstrate to you what they have done and what they can show to you. And that's the key. So that is the conversation of teacher accountability. And let's finish this podcast with another one. It's based John Hattie research. We look at John Hattie research, right? And it's surprising to me how challenging for many people to understand what is this data telling you, okay? Don't look at Hattie word for word. Look at the lens of teachers. And I think that's the biggest challenge when I talk with other teachers and they agree with me, is looking at John Hattie, not what he wrote, but based on the research that he annotate and look at, okay? And you look at the first top 10, you realize that it has a very common thing in pattern. And that is instruction or strategy that focus on student individual need. For example, self-reported grades. If you notice, it has the highest effect size of 1.4. That is almost 3 times the learning years. Actually, more than 3 times, because 0.4 is the average, right? So what is self-reported grade? You have to think this in terms of a teacher, of a practical solution. Self-reported grade is more than just student reflect on their learning. It's more than that. From a practical perspective, self-reported grade, just look at it. That means student able to self-assess, as well the teacher self-assess the student learning at the same time. And using today's technology, the student can get immediate feedback and instant feedback. And one of the biggest challenges about John Hattie research is that a lot of these studies happen before we have this one-to-one technology or even access to a lot of powerful technology that we have today. You have to realize that, okay? So when we think or interpret John Hattie, you cannot look at his word and look at the research literally. You have to interpret as a teacher in today's classroom. Just look at self-reported grade. What does really mean self-reported grade? It could be anything, right? But from a practical standpoint, it's basic grading student work and provide feedback. And using today's technology, we can provide adaptive assessment that provide that instant feedback and allow a student to build on prior knowledge, right? PJ program, what does that really mean? It's basically looking at how students learn through the progress of development. The more they mature, the more their brain function, the more they can think abstract, right? And then think of formative evaluation. What does that really mean? Evaluation, micro teaching, right? It focuses on one thing only, and that is building on student prior knowledge and allow the student to check for understanding. And again, going back to think about how we learn. We learn not because we are forced to read textbook or listen to PowerPoint. We learn because we struggle to understand our knowledge. But the moment that we really learn is that we overcome the challenges and we solve the problem. We understand what the teacher taught us in the class through solving problems, right? And that's the key that we need to understand from John Hattie. We have to look at the very first one, self-reported grade. And if we can focus on that as our main driving factor, it doesn't matter what strategy you use. As long as it provides students opportunity to think critically, solve problems, and self-assess themselves, you are on the right track. And again, those are just conversations that we have teachers. Don't look at education research literally the way the researcher wrote it. Apply to today's classroom, and then you can make a big difference in your teaching as well as the big difference in your student learning outcome. And that right there concludes our conversation of our first podcast on teacher accountability. And we see you next week on another podcast. We will talk about student accountability.